Hey, Fenggang.
Hi.
Hi, you can hear me. That's good. Hi, everybody. Okay, you usually start about 2:04, Fenggang, so I'll introduce you. All right. Well, welcome to what's going to be my final MBL series at OCMS. I'm just really excited about the series. Today we have Yang Fenggang, who will be speaking. Next week we have Hannah Nation, who's going to be looking at Wang Yi of Chengdu and his writings. I'll come next, and I'm going to be looking at developments of Jiujiao Zhonghua from 2013 to the current time, and especially in light of the four groups when we gathered here in 2013 and what's happened to those groups in their place in China today. And then we'll end up with Nancy of Duke University, who will be looking at the engagement of Christians within the academic world, and particularly looking at He Guanghu at Beijing University. But the series should be excellent, and if I can get the agreement of Fenggang and Nancy and Hannah, it'd be great to put together a transformation on this and get it published with Transformation, which is a journal that's really rising in notoriety of late. So it'd be really great to have that. But in that, I'm really pleased to introduce Yang Fenggang, and who is the founding director of the Center on Religion and Global East at Purdue University, West Lafayette, Indiana. He's working on a book, The Rise of Christianity in Modernizing China, that's going to be put out with Oxford University Press. Fenggang was at that 2013 conference and had some really important things to say. And I think we had actually met up before that, but we're just really pleased to have Fenggang to start us off today. And with that, I turn it over to you, Fenggang, to begin your lecture.
Huh?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Okay. Today is an exceptional day. In the past, I declined invitations to give a lecture or even a keynote speech on this day. Almost every year since 1989, I set this day aside to have a quiet time to remember the people who died around Tiananmen Square in 1989. It is a memorial day for the Chinese. I mourn not only those whose bodies were crushed, but also those whose souls perished. It is a spiritual day for me, as it triggered my own soul searching and led to my conversion, change of career, and change of life. Sometime in the spring, Tom invited me to give a lecture on Christianity in China. And sometime this summer, I agreed, but didn't expect it to be on this special day. When he told me this lecture would be on June 4th, it made me wonder and ponder. Is this fortuitous, fated, or predestined? So I told Tom the title of my lecture must be this: Tiananmen Square, 1989, a watershed of the Chinese Great Awakening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this topic on this particular day, the 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square, 1989. Because this is a special day, so let us briefly review the events of 1989. On April 15, former Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Hu Yaobang died unexpectedly. He was sympathetic to the intellectuals and the students who advocated for democratization. Immediately, college students began posting poems and making speeches to express their feelings. A week later, the funeral was held at the People's Hall on the west side of the Tiananmen Square. Many people gathered in the Tiananmen Square to mourn. 3 students went to the People's Hall entrance to hand in a petition letter, but no one accepted it. They were ignored. A day after that, the disappointed students in Beijing began a class strike. May 4th was the 70th anniversary of the May 4th movement in 1919. Marches and demonstrations took place in Beijing and many other cities in China. On May 13, some students began a hunger strike in Tiananmen Square. 2 days before Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev visit to China, many Western media organizations sent news crews to Beijing to cover this historical visit, but accidentally caught the Tiananmen demonstrations on camera. I watched Dan Rather of CBS from the beginning to the very end when the cable was unplugged and the screen went dark. 2 days after Gorbachev left, Premier Li Peng declared martial law in parts of Beijing, or most parts of Beijing. On May 30, a statue named Goddess of Democracy, Minzhu Nushen, was erected in Tiananmen Square, directly facing Chairman Mao's massive portrait on the Tiananmen Gate. The symbolism was startling, but it remained ambiguous for most people most of the time. For me, this symbolism means that the fight for democracy and freedom requires some spiritual symbols and principles. But the made-up goddess of democracy was not it. It only triggered the thinking that we need something sacred, holy, and transcendent. On the night of June 3rd, tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square and crushed the protests. However, this is remembered as the June 4th massacre, or the June 4th incident in China's official discourse. Why is it June 4th instead of June 3rd? Have you ever wondered about this fact? Interestingly, according to the Jewish calendar, a new day starts at sundown. So the evening of June 3rd in the common calendar would be June 4th on the Hebrew calendar. This is my personal interpretation of the mysterious link of Tiananmen Square 1989 with the Judeo-Christian God. At the time, I was not in Beijing. I was far away in Washington, D.C. In January 1989, I went to the Catholic University of America as a visiting scholar. Unlike the other visiting scholar, Liu Xiaobo, who was at Columbia University at that time, who went back to Beijing, I remained a faraway spectator and was never an activist. Nevertheless, I was shocked, lost, and changed forever, like hundreds of millions. Now let's see some photos. what do the demonstrators want? They want equality, liberty, and human rights. They say, carry on the spirit of the May 4th movement and strive for democracy and freedom. Here is the goddess of democracy facing off against Chairman Mao. Then tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square. The next two photos will be challenging to view. So this is a warning. So you may close your eyes for a minute. On Eternal Peace Avenue, Chang'anjie, leading to Tiananmen Square, there are tanks, crushed bodies, and crushed bicycles. After the tanks rolled away, some people came for a closer look. So let's all pause for a few seconds to mourn the lost lives. In 1961, the English historian Arnold Toynbee delivered a lecture at the University of Pennsylvania titled America and the World Revolution. Toynbee said, within this last 186 years, the sound of that American shot has been traveling round and round the globe, just like a man-made satellite. He said, it had been heard in France, Spanish America, Greece, the whole of continental Europe, then again and again in Italy, Russia, Persia, Turkey, India, China, and Mexico. Similarly, I think the shot heard in Tiananmen Square also traveled round and round the world. One day after the Tiananmen Square massacre, Solidarity in Poland wins the election. On October 18, the Berlin Wall comes down. On December 25, Ceausescu in Romania was deposed and executed. On December 29, Havel became president of Czechoslovakia. In the summer of 1990, all the communist regimes in Europe were replaced by democratically elected governments. In December 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. So the shot heard in Tiananmen Square traveled around the world and sparked the revolutions and the crumbling of the Soviet bloc. The American political scientist Francis Fukuyama published this book in 1992, celebrating the end of history. He said, what we may be witnessing is not the end of the Cold War, but the end of history as such. That is the end point of man's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy. But he forgot Asian communism. In China, Vietnam, and North Korea, the communist regimes have remained and have even become stronger. Since 1989, China has experienced a rapid economic development for more than 3 decades, which has led to dramatic reduction in poverty, rapid urbanization, technological advancement, and far-reaching globalization. With the party state in China, while the party state in China has evolved from authoritarianism to totalitarianism, many old and new democracies in the West and the global South have been polarized and have other problems, very serious problems. These changes have triggered the question, is the communist China model the real alternative to liberal democracy? Pessimism or despair has grown among the Chinese who desire for democracy, especially after witnessing the death of Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo in 2017, the one who returned to China from the US as a visiting scholar. The effective suppression of political dissidents within the PRC, the disarray of democracy activists in exile, and the forceful integration of Hong Kong under CCP rule. It seems that Taiwan is also within the reach of the CCP now. After 35 years, keeping the memory of Tiananmen Square alive has become a struggle. So it is appropriate to say that Tiananmen Square 1989 marks the end of China's democratization. Where can the Chinese find hope in the hopeless world? Following the paragraph I read just now about the sound of the shot of the American Revolution making rounds around the world, Toynbee then said, quote, "The new world revolution of the peasantry perhaps cannot properly be called a religious revolution. At the same time, it is unquestionably a spiritual one. It is true that the objectives that are its first aim are of a material kind, but the material foundations are a means to a spiritual end. And what could be more obviously spiritual than the awakening of hope and purposefulness and energy that is the driving force behind the whole of this glorious revolution," end quote. The spiritual meaning of Tiananmen Square 1989 is exactly that. This is a watershed in the Chinese Great Awakening. Hope in a hopeless world is impossible without faith. In Romans, please allow me to quote this. In Romans, Paul says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." The Chinese Great Awakening began in the 1970s. The Tiananmen Square 1989 marks a watershed of that Great Awakening. I think for those familiar about the changes in China, or if you have read my book on Religion in China, Survival and Revival under Communist Rule, you should all familiar with the earlier history of religion in the People's Republic of China. So let me skip most of the review. We can move to the next. after okay, so I think because of time, let me skip most of this. I would say in China, all religions were banned for 13 years. There was no single church or temple open for religious services between 1966 and 1979. As China began the reforms, beginning in 1979, churches, temples, mosques were allowed to reopen. So for the first 10 years in the reform era, religion gradually came back. But now, as we learn more and more through published testimonials and our own oral history interviews, we learned that in the 1970s, and actually Christian revivals began in the 1960s, in Wenzhou, in Fuzhou, in many places. It's really 1968, 69 already have small scale revivals. Some young people got baptized. These people became leaders in the later decades. And in the 1970s, very much there was a great revival began in Henan, Anhui, Zhejiang, sweeping the rural areas. So after the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Communist Party reported that they find the number of Christians multiplied during the time when church was shut down completely. From, the change is before Cultural Revolution, there were 1 million Christians, Protestant Christians. After the Cultural Revolution, they found there were 3 million. But historians say maybe there were 5 to 6 million Protestant Christians around 1980. So there was already a great awakening, sweeping the rural areas in the 1970s. Since 1989, there's a change. The change is really waves of mass conversions, I call it. We'll come back to review these different waves. First began with the activists. A few years ago, the Christianity Today magazine in the US did a story about Tiananmen's most wanted student leaders who converted to become Christian. On the left is Pastor Zhang Boli. He is a pastor. He founded several churches in the US, in Australia, in Singapore. He is a popular evangelist. On the right is Zhou Fengsuo, another student leader, and he leads a charity organization. He remains activist for democracy and freedom. These are only 2 of the 4 among the 21 most wanted student leaders. The other 2 are Chai Ling, it's the 4th one, a woman. And then the last one, Xiong Yan. He became a minister, military chaplain. These are the 4 who have have done open testimony about their conversion. The others, we don't know whether anyone have been baptized, but many of them certainly feel closer to Christianity than to any other religion or value system. I began fieldwork research in China in 2000. Immediately, I was impressed to see so many young people in urban China. So a few years later, I published this article, Lost in the Market, Saved at McDonald's, Conversion to Christianity in Urban China. In this, I argued there are important contextual factors for mass conversions that I witnessed in urban China. These factors are the market economy, economic transition to a market, to the market. People became free, but lack of certainty. Then there was the continuous political repression for the people who desire for liberty, equality, and democracy. They find Christianity provides the spiritual foundation or the spiritual principles for a hopeful society. And certainly globalization is another big factor. So that's why the title Lost in the Market, Saved at McDonald's. It's not that the McDonald's saved them, it's McDonald's as a symbol of globalization and some universal values. Not so much the consumerism, but it's really once you get a meal or a cup of drink and sit down at the table belongs to you for a while. And you can go in and feel free there. So actually, when I was interviewing people, I often ask my interviewees, where should we meet for the interview? That's in the year 2000. Many of the young people said, oh, let's meet at McDonald's. So McDonald's was their favorite. In 2008, there was a special gathering in San Francisco. They called it a generation's testimony. During the 3-day meetings, 300 ministers, all lay leaders, they were on stage and made prayers, testimonies, and also dedications or rededications. And in the large audience, 153 of them made a decision to believe in Jesus Christ. Those 300 ministers, many were based in the US or Canada, or come from Australia, other overseas places, but some came from China. And their testimonies are really very powerful. Seeing this generation of pastors, you can imagine how many more lay people, ordinary believers out there. So this is a photo from that gathering. I was not there. I was busy with my sociological research and organizing conferences in China. This was held in December in 2008 in San Francisco. This is a photo of a Beijing Shouwang Church. It became a church that led to the effort to go public. Before 2000, most of the house churches remained underground, trying to hide from the public. But after 2000, as the numbers grow fast, and many more college-educated young people became Christian, so they desire to be public. And so around 2003, many of the small house churches began to form large congregations, and then they rent office buildings to be their churches. And Shouwang Church was a leading one. at that time. They also applied to the Chinese government to register as a religious organization, but they refused to join the Three Self-Patriotic Movement Committee. And so as a result, their application was rejected, and they were evicted from their rented place. Then they bought a floor in the office building, but the authorities ordered the real estate owners to refuse to give the keys to the church. So they were evicted in 2009. This was the first time they had an outdoor worship service at a park in Beijing. It became another symbol in this long road of going to public. This is the Chengdu Church, Chengdu Early Rain Church, led by Pastor Wang Yi. And different from the earlier wave of converts, especially those in the rural areas, the new waves of converts, perhaps because of their educational background and their middle class background, they are more engaged in politics. So Pastor Wang Yi, every year on June 4th, he would have prayer gatherings to pray for China, a prayer day for China. Many other churches, the house churches, large house church congregations would do the same. So they are different. They are publicly engaged. It's really seeing that for more than a decade by myself, and also reading the published testimonials and stories. The first time I made this proposition was in 2012, when I had a featured interview with the National Public Radio. I said Tiananmen Square was a watershed for Chinese conversions to Christianity. Since then, further evidence simply repeatedly reaffirms this proposition. Of course, since the second term of Xi Jinping began in 2017, Xi Jinping as the party general secretary and also the chairman of the state of the People's Republic of China, the suppression house churches has intensified. And in 2018, several large, well-known house churches were closed down, shut down. And Pastor Wang Yi was arrested. A year later, he was sentenced to 9 years prison term for inciting subversion and illegal business activities. The illegal business activities is that his church also runs a elementary school, seminary, and printing materials, distribute those materials outside the church. So you will hear about Pastor Wang Yi in the coming lecture in this series. So I wouldn't talk in any detail here. And the position of Pastor Wang Yi was very clear. His last words after he was arrested, he made this statement released called faithful disobedience. Actually, what he meant was that he had no interest in overthrow the political system. He had no interest in political power, but he was very interested in rights, in civil rights. And his disobedience is all about faith, that the government should not take this constitutional right away from anyone, from Christians, from Falun Gong practitioners, from anyone. Any citizen should have this constitutional right of religious freedom. So again, since 1989, we have seen waves of mass conversions. The cultural Christians, first after 1989, here, I became a professor, a lecturer at Renmin University in 1987, after I earned a master's degree from Nankai University in Beijing. And at that time, I went to Beijing Haidian Church several times. And in the church, on Sunday worship time, the church was half empty, or you can say half full. And that was the situation even before I left for the US in January 1989. Then in 1994, I returned for a semester and taught for a semester at the Renmin University when I was a graduate student at the Catholic University of America. And by 1994, the Haidian Church was full on Sundays. Then 1997, I made another visit. After I earned my PhD, I was thinking to go back to Beijing to work. And so visited several universities and visited churches. By then, the churches were already overcrowded. Every Sunday worship service was packed. And that was the old building. So later on, some of you may have seen the large new building. And actually more and more large church buildings erected in the major cities throughout China, and especially in Wenzhou area. The Wenzhou area really comes from another wave of mass conversions. These are the so-called boss Christians, or Christian business people. In 1992, the Chinese Communist Party set its goal, the primary task is to develop a market economy. Of course, it is socialist market economy. But as soon as the market economy idea became official, we saw the rise of business people all over China. Among them, a phenomenon is the Wenzhou business people. And Wenzhou Chamber of Commerce had a Chamber of Commerce in more than 100 cities in China. Among Wenzhou business people, a very high proportion Christian business people, they do business, at the same time, they bring the church to the place where they do business, or they invest, they give money, donate money to build churches all over China. Actually, Wenzhou business people not only did that within China, they have gone abroad. In Italy, in France, in Spain, you would see many Wenzhou business people. And in Italy alone, there are at least 70 Chinese Protestant churches. And those are run mostly by Wenzhou business people. That's simply one area, symbolic, but it is broader. In many other places, the Christian business people became a phenomena. So there are many fellowships, Christian business people fellowship, because they need to sort out what they should do, what the right thing to do in this chaotic market transition. Then, of course, overseas, Chinese students and scholars began to come to Christian churches after 1989. When I did my dissertation research in the 1990s, I finished that in the end of 1996, and I visited all the churches in the Washington, D.C. area, all the Chinese churches in the Washington, D.C. area. And at that time, the majority of church members were from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, or other places. And some were born in the US. They are ABCs, American born Chinese. That was the time when I did my dissertation research. But those churches, almost all of them were very welcome to mainland Chinese. 30 years later, nowadays in the US, we have seen more Chinese churches established in the last 3 decades. And nowadays, in most of the Chinese churches, the majority are people from mainland China. And most of them are first generation converts. And in the 1990s, many of them, well, some of them returned to China to work in companies or as evangelists. So they really joined the waves within China of the Great Awakening. So beginning in 2000, we see urban house churches emerge above ground, forming large congregations with 200, 300, 500, 800 people, all over 1,000. In Shanghai, the Wanbang Church got more than 2,000 people on the weekend. And the Beijing Zion Church, for a while, the weekend worship service would have 2,500 people in 5 services. So the rise of urban house churches, you could find a large congregation of house churches again in all the provincial capital cities and some other large cities. At the same time, the 3 self churches also became big. Many are mega churches by the definition used in the US. And then in 2005, there was the phenomena of Weiquan lawyers. These are the civil rights or human rights lawyers. And actually, the Asia Weekly magazine based in Hong Kong made the Weiquan lawyers as Peoples of the Year in 2005. They profiled 14 of them. The majority of them are Christian. Then in 2008, I organized the Beijing Summit for the social scientific study of religion. It's a large conference at Peking University, Beijing University. It's at that time, I first time encountered a Christian artist. From there, I quickly learned that there were 200 to 300 professional or career artists who have become Christian. These are the artists who make a living from their artworks. Scholars, lawyers, artists, and business people. When these people turn to Christianity, these are the people, their careers, their profession, their jobs have broader impact in society rather than being Christian themselves alone. So the meaning of these waves of conversions is very significant, and the implications is broad and profound. And at the same time, the earlier waves of conversions in the rural areas, they have persisted. Of course, every time there are always some struggles, And when many of the young people from rural areas went to the cities in search of jobs, they feel, oh, some of the village churches become empty. That's true. But we need to have the broader view. China has become rapidly urbanized. Many of the house church denominations, I would say, from Henan, Anhui, and Zhejiang, now many of their churches are in the cities, in the urban areas. The denominations persist. The last thing I want to have a few very brief reflection. We don't have time to go into any detail. Is why Christianity is the religion that has grown fastest in Reform era China. In former Soviet countries, all of them have returned to the pre-communist dominant religion. But why it is Christianity in China when China remains under communist rule? Of course, as a sociologist, I look at the social conditions for this rise of Christianity. Modernization, globalization, these are important factors. And the reforms and the opening up under communist leadership has this unintended consequence that made Christianity the most appealing alternative to the communist ideology and value system. Because when Tom Harvey told me the series is about the 中国化, 基督教中国化, the making Christianity more Chinese, I said, think about this. Actually, Christianity has become so Chinese that it has become the most appealing religion to those who desire for modernity, desire to be part of the global society, the universal values. So I think we have good reasons and evidence to show that Christianity has become very Chinese, culturally indigenized. People in China, they not only use Chinese language, but the Chinese vocabulary, Chinese terms to articulate the faith to the Chinese. And rituals, Christian rituals, have become very Chinese. Funerals, weddings, and other occasions. Also, Christianity has become very much contextualized. If you hear the preachings from the churches, I would say both house churches and three-self churches, you will hear they are very much responding to the social currents and the social needs. Family, or children's education, or the moral corruption, the social decay. These are common themes you would hear from the sermons. Then the last factor is Christianity has remained politically engaged. This is different from traditional Chinese religions like Buddhism or Taoism. Those tend to be seeking spirituality outside of this world. They would avoid talking about politics. As I showed you, like Wang Yi and many other house church leaders, they do not shy away from talking about political issues. But again, their talk is about civil rights, not political power. Rights and power, these two words are very distinct, but in Chinese, it sounds the same, all 权利, right? But the 权利, one is power, one is rights. Two characters, Chinese characters. And Christians want to protect their rights for free religious freedom Actually, in this aspect, today's Christians in China very much resonant or echo what Sun Zhongshan started. Sun Zhongshan, as the founding father of the Republic of China in 1912, his thoughts were summarized in the teaching of 三民主义. The 三民主义 is 民族, 民生, and 民权. The third one is often translated as democracy. Actually, the word means civil rights. Says the republic should protect civil rights. And today's Christians in China, they want their rights protected. They demand it, they practice it. And they call the authorities to respect their own constitution that guarantees these rights. It's exactly because of their position in this, it made Christianity one of the most appealing compared with other value systems. So I guess I have to end here, and I'm working on a book here today. I only summarized as only the outline of one chapter on the waves of conversions or conversions across social strata. And, you know, I have many other obligations and distractions. One of the distractions is the AI. And AI has become such a big thing. I have to play with it. And I asked AI to generate a book cover for me. After a few rounds, this is the best the AI could generate, the book cover for my forthcoming book. Okay, I will stop here. Thank you.
Well, let's put our hands together and thank Ron. Yeah, thank you, Fenggang, for an excellent lecture, and yeah, it's something that I think a lot of us have experienced from June 4th. A couple of people in the room here, including myself, were in China on the 4th of June and were there after. And I would say the same thing, even immediately after, the kind of conversations that I had with people after June 4th, there was an openness to Christianity. One of the things that's very interesting about here in the UK, and I don't know if you know this, but Ying Swan Huan has done research, and it shows that the Chinese churches in the UK are the fastest growing churches in the whole country. And they're growing very, very rapidly. A lot of that is the BNO visa from Hong Kong. But many of the people who come don't come initially as Christians, but upon arrival in England, they go to churches. And they find other Chinese Christians there, and through that come to faith. So I think this is really important. I'll start off with a question. Where do you see, in terms of the growth of the church happening right now in China, where is that happening? Is that primarily still in the urban areas like Beijing, Guangzhou, Dalian, other places, or is it elsewhere? And if there are regions of the country where that is growing faster, what are those?
I would say the latest is, as far as I can tell, is that the growth must have slowed down significantly, both because of the suppression and also COVID.
Yeah.
And the COVID impact is enormous. But at the same time, many churches turned online. At that time, actually before COVID hit, house churches were forced to go virtual. They already prepared for that. So, I keep asking people, do you still have baptism in recent years? Many do, even though at a smaller scale. And because urbanization has been so rapid, and most of the people nowadays in China live in urban areas, large cities, mid-sized cities, small cities. So I would say Christian churches are active in cities. In rural areas, some of the rural areas became more difficult because we know this called there's some Chinese saying, if I can recall it, is 六一386it's basically women, children, older people remain in the village. Young and mid-aged men and women, they have gone to the urban centers to find jobs. That itself puts some challenge to the rural village churches. That's true, but they persisted. There are some very good studies about the grandparents passing Christianity to their grandchildren in the rural areas because the parents' generation are away. And in terms of area of different parts of China, different regions, during my visit for 16 years, I traveled intensely in China between 2000 and 2016. I've gone to many cities, including those in the Northwest, Lanzhou, Xi'an, and Southwest, in some remote places in Sichuan, like Nanchong, and so on. Everywhere there were young people going to churches. So it's hard to tell. And also, the Henan churches, when they were severely persecuted in the 1980s, and some of you may have heard these stories that they were chased away, but because China's police system is police would only take care of things within their jurisdiction. So when they are chased, they would flee to the neighboring counties, neighboring provinces. After you cross the border, it's beyond the control of that set of police. And that's a way they spread. Whenever they go, they would spread Christianity and plant churches. Then after a while, they decided to send off young evangelists to faraway places so that they would not be chased by the police. They sent those evangelists to the far southwest in Yunnan province, or the far northeast in Heilongjiang. Actually, what's interesting, I would say, I don't know. This may be all speculation. In Heilongjiang, near the border with Russia, there was a village. An old woman became Christian. He was illiterate. One day he received a young man who fled from Beijing. He was the student leader, one of the student leaders. He tried to cross the border to the Soviet Union. He stayed with this old lady, and this old lady asked him to read the Bible for her. And he was Zhang Boli, who eventually became a pastor. And could that old lady, the fruit of Henan House Church? I don't know. He may not know. Now she is no longer here in this world. It may be difficult to find out. But there may be some connection between the Henan rural churches and the new wave of urban conversions in the 1990s.
Okay, well, thank you, Fenggang. If anyone online would like to make a comment or a question, at the bottom of your screen, there's a response button. And on the response button, just you'll see raise hand. Click on that, and then I'll be able to see that you're, and I'll recognize you, and you can unmute and ask Fenggang a question. And the same is true. Does anybody have a question here? Let's go right here, Sarah.
Hi, Dr. Fenggang. Thank you so much for the lecture. It's been very good. My name is Sarah, and I'm Iranian and from the Middle East. The reason I introduced myself because I have an agenda in my questions. And I have two questions, and both again raised both based on my own personal agenda, being from Iran, and also the conversion among Iranians, and then within this revolution, Iranian revolution, and the restrictions of these things, I saw lots of similarities between what you were talking about and the conversions in Iran, except Iran still the churches are not there. The two questions is, the first one is relation to the politics democracy. Who is democracy? And also the definition of the democracy, whether the Chinese, because being from the Middle East, what I notice more and more that the Western democracy, the way they present it, the way they are theorizing it, or they wanted to implement it, does not fit with the Middle Eastern understanding and worldview and mentality. Yet at the same time, we do need a democracy. But whose democracy can we have and do we need? This is, and then again in relation to the China, did you have the difficulty in understanding whose democracy do the Chinese people really seek? Is there any new version of democracy that the Chinese activists are advocating for? And this is my first question. And the second question again come very much linked to that. Again, my own agenda I raised as a communist and atheist from childhood. And then I converted when I was 18, 19 in Iran. And again, at the heart of especially Protestant Christianity is capitalism. And you cannot remove capitalism. That is my struggle since I become a Christian. And still I struggle with this idea of capitalism being at the heart of our faith. And how Chinese Christian, especially majority of those Chinese Christian like me, perhaps I grew up in Islamic country, yet raised as a communist. And what Chinese, some of the Chinese how do they deal with this concept being a Protestant Christianity has at its own heart is capitalism. And then especially when you're talking about the Chinese, Christianity become more and more Chinese. That is what my question. Two questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for this very important questions. And I heard that Christianity also grew quite fast in Iran. If Christianity is clearly in decline in the West, certainly in Europe, perhaps also in the US, and the hope for Christian persistence or growth perhaps is in the East, not only the Far East, but also Iran and other places beyond the West. Whose democracy it is that the Chinese desire for? That's a very good question, important question, is that we don't know actually. People do desire for democracy and freedom. How do you protect your freedom, liberty, really talking about this political liberty? Perhaps only democratic system could provide that, protect that. So that's why the Chinese have desire for democracy. But interestingly, at least in mainland China, again, it ended in 1989. China has not become any more democratic. And even among the exiled democracy activists, they are not really practicing democracy by themselves. That's why the chaos of the exiled activist communities, they could not come together, sit down, have a good democratic engagement. So I guess the only hope that more and more Chinese democracy activists see is in Taiwan. Taiwan has become democratic. It is a Western type of democracy. I have to say, the free elections and the check and balance of different branches of the power, political power, And Taiwan's democratization has been very successful in terms of transition from one political party to another, the power, smooth transition. Of course, there were some chaos in the process, but overall, it has been a peaceful, smooth transition. So I have seen many of the overseas Chinese democracy activists attracted to Taiwan, visiting Taiwan. So I understand, democratization itself may not be good for Christianity. As far as seeing the Arab Spring and the turnaround of Turkey, Egypt, those places, if democracy means majority rule, then Christian minorities will be in trouble. But if democracy really means protecting rights of everyone, including the rights of conscience and freedom of religion, then Christians would gain a better position in democracy. But the things are complicated. I know in Iran, you do have elections. You elect the president, even though the president is not the real top leader in the country. But nonetheless, you have election. China even does not have free election. In that sense, Iran is more democratic than in the PRC. But the experience of Chinese in mainland China is that maybe democracy is not the hope. Again, they find hope in Christianity. Without people turning to Christianity, how can you have a democracy? That's Wang Yi's position. He said, I'm not interested in changing the regime, changing the political system. I'm interested in developing Christian communities one by one. Only after the people change their hearts, change their minds, we will have a better society. The next thing, the next question about the connection of Christianity and capitalism, if you're from a communist background, that is a challenge. Many Chinese have undergone the transformation, really, in the last several decades, including myself. Right? When we were educated in atheism, communism, we always prefer the communist ideal because it's so beautiful, right? Equality, free, and it's a beautiful ideal. It's a utopia, but only that this utopia is based on false assumption about human nature. Human nature are sinful. When you put them together, sins are there. You cannot assume people will become perfect, holy people. Communism assumes people can be holy. Christians don't believe that anymore. So capitalism also being redefined, right? China now says, oh, communists, we can also develop a market economy. We don't call it capitalism, but market economy means based on equal access. You provide your products and a service for profits. You always maximize your profits whenever possible without, if you have moral principles, without violating your moral principles, without violating the law. And also individual consumers, you always maximize the best rewards possible, again, without violating moral or legal laws. That's the market system. It's equality, equal access. So Max Weber, the most important in my mind, sociologist, he argued there is affinity between the Protestant Christian ethics and the spirit of capitalism, the classic form of capitalism and the classic form of liberalism are somehow compatible. And so, yeah, I think most of the Christians, after they become Christian, even though yeah, things complicated, is that among Christians in the U.S., that's the most of my contacts nowadays. I do see some are very supportive of the Chinese Communist regime. You know, they are very much bought into the patriotic rhetoric. But if you live long and going to church long, gradually you will be educated out of this communist utopia communism, and appreciate this classic liberalism, which nowadays among the Chinese they call conservatism. There's a strong trend of conservatism. This Tom, you're going to talk about the four schools of thought in China, but one of those has become emerged since 2014, 13. That is conservatism, but it's really classic liberalism,
Yeah.
in my mind. So I see this kind of development. This is the process of struggle, sorting out, and there's, there people have different views, different positions. I would say there are broader trends moving in those directions.
John, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hey. All right, thanks. Thanks, Professor Yang, for a really fascinating talk. I really look forward to your book coming out. So I just had a question about, you alluded to sort of the more repressive environment under Xi, and I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about how Chinese congregations in the PRC are adapting to this sort of much more strict political environment. You know, you mentioned during COVID, some churches moving online, but my sense is that even online spaces are not necessarily, you know, safe from state surveillance or control. So I'm wondering if you have a sense of ways in which Christian groups might be adapting to this much more restrictive environment. Thanks.
Yes, during COVID, churches were not allowed to have in-person meetings. Right? That's more strict in China. The lockdown rules were much strict. The three South churches couldn't meet, and house churches, of course, they couldn't meet, both because of COVID and the new regulations. But again, they have turned to virtual, and for example, the Zion Church in Beijing, even in 2018, they started the service called walking worship. The pastor would pre-record the sermon, and also the choir would record the praise and singing, and then they distribute these recordings to members. Then they ask members to meet in small groups at homes or in public parks. They gather together, sing together, then listen to their earphones. And in that way, they already learned to practice religion without physically gathering in one place. And since then, I have seen large online gatherings of several hundreds regularly, very common, and some even 1,000. You know, Zoom has a limit of 1,000. That's one kind of service. Then they can simultaneously broadcast to more Zoom rooms. So sometimes there are several thousands people attending the same meeting. And I visited some rural church systems in their Zoom training of teaching their kids for Christian education. There are many of them. I would say turning to this online has become a way of adjusting. Of course, you may have seen news report about the three South churches. The authorities installed video cameras. Each church would have at least 3 cameras, one facing the pulpit, the pulpit, the preacher, one facing the entrance, so anyone walking in is on record, and also one on the donation box, the tithing box, and anyone putting in money is on record. Those window churches, they tried to sabotage that, but the authorities were persistent. They would come back and reinstall. After a few rounds, the churches says, okay, go ahead. We are open. Our face is not hidden. It's fine. So they adjust in that way, accepting these restrictions, but nonetheless, they keep meeting. And sometimes the officials would become tired. So that's getting even better. Then also many of the house churches have break down to small groups. It's any meeting with more than perhaps 50 people can be conspicuous, can be hard. The police may come in, or religious affairs officials would come in to stop you. But less than that, if 2,000, 3,000 people gathering at home, it's almost no interference from the authorities. So like Shanghai Wanbang Church, early on, they break to small groups. And actually small groups are more effective in evangelism than the large congregational meeting. So small group gatherings, online meetings are effective ways of accommodating, adjusting in the new environment.
Hey, David, so.
Yeah, thank you for your lecture. My question is that the Chinese Communist parties obviously suspecting that these Chinese churches are being used by Western power to create trouble for the party. And this phenomena of suspicions, I think, can be understood from their point of view in some way. They are sitting in Xi Jinping's office. You will see all this Christianity from the West and all these churches supporting Christians in China. I mean, it's not that difficult for him to suspect that Western power is actually using Christianity to create trouble for China. So in light of these suspicions, how are the Chinese churches responding to these suspicions? Do they respond in the same way, or are there a variety of ways in which they're responding to these suspicions?
Yeah, thank you for the question. After the crumbling of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European bloc, the Chinese Communist Party made this a priority. They tried to shut down color revolution at the very beginning. Whenever they find any tendency, they rush in to suppress it, because they believed, they were convinced that the change in Poland started off everything, right? So, and the change of Poland was due to Pope John Paul II. And so the Catholic Church may have played a very important role in that change. Maybe, there's some reason, even though it's exaggerated, amplified, but they like to talk about it. And then it says, watch Christian churches. They may be the most subversive social forces. In a sense, they're right, they are true, because for a long time, Christian churches are the real civil society in China. They are more autonomous, independent from outside control. They do the civil society organizational things like those they do in civil society in other countries. So the communists are smart. They know that's the real threat may come from Christian churches. Christians, many also, once they learn the worries, the Communist Party worried about the organization. So as long as you do not become a strong organization, you can do individual evangelism, try to persuade individuals to change without joining an organization. But if you do not join a congregation to have a congregational life, is that really Christian life? Ultimately, Christian leaders in China says, no, we want to be true Christians. Congregational life is part of being Christian. No matter how suspicious the authorities get, we have to protect our rights to be part of a congregation, the organization. Not only that, Pastor Wang Yi helped to develop a presbytery called West China Presbytery. Several churches formed a presbytery, and that's in Chengdu. Then they reached out to churches in other parts of China. Says if you follow our theology, the Reformed theology, and follow the Presbyterian governance, then you may join our organization, the denomination. When the police came to talk to Pastor Wang Yi said, look, we do this not to sabotage, to subvert the authorities. We are not interested in that. But, we need to select elders, select pastors. We will never join the Three Self Church because that's the Three Self Committee is not considered a church organization, as a political organization. We do not want to do politics, but we want to have a mechanism to assess, evaluate, and select leaders. If the leaders made mistakes, sinned, we should have a mechanism to correct that. And the denomination would serve that function. If your interest, the authority's interest, is for social stability, we are contributing to that social stability rather than subvert. Well, some of the officials understood that's true. Only that when the order comes from higher above, they have to take action against churches. And so, and also for Christians, ecclesia, that means universal church. How can you simply cut off ties from Christians outside China? It's simply un-Christian. Right? That's what the house church leaders believe. To be a holy Christian, the whole, you have to have exchange, learn from each other, and inspired by each other, encouraged by each other. So isolated church is no longer a full church. Right? So no matter how the government say you should not have connections with outside world, that's simply not possible. That's why there's this disobedience. Disobedience in faith. On faith matters, they persist. Wang Yi as a leader, he articulated the principles very clearly, and more others learn about it and accept it. So, and actually, Wang Yi even further says that communism, in a sense, is idol worship. It's a totalitarian society. They want you to worship one person, one ideal, and the party. And actually, there is another incident during the Tiananmen Square 1989. 3 young people from Hunan province, Mao's home province, came to Beijing. They vandalized the portrait of Chairman Mao on Tiananmen Gate. That's vandalism, but they were sentenced to 20 years or lifetime prison term. It shows that the worship of Mao is so well protected by the communist government. They know Christians come in would destroy that kind of idol worship. That's a real threat. It's true. I think in some sense, the authorities are right to see Christianity as a threat. On the other hand, if they want to pursue modernity, to make China a modern nation, modern country, then they also have to follow the modern principles in the United Nations covenants and universal values. Many in the party understand it, only that now they are sidelined, they are not in power. Those in power are opposed to this.
Can I just ask you to go further on that? Are the CCP leadership scared of the church? If so, how does it appear? Or do they think they've got the church pretty much where they can control it?
First question, yes, they fear. It's obvious. They never hide that. They make this public. If you read their documents, they make this clear. Do they feel they have things under control? No. They know it's already beyond control. You know, as I write my book, I've been weighing different discourses. How can I make sense of the change in China, the rise of Christianity in China? I say it's really existing social science theories cannot fully explain the rise of Christianity in China. Because it's very much, it's very rare in human history. The only other precedence is the Roman Empire in the 4th century. In 303, the emperors decided to have the great persecution, wipe out Christians. At that time, there were maybe 5 to 10% of Roman Empire subjects were Christian. But they soon realized it has become too late, impossible to wipe out. And then Constantine gained the power. He became the emperor. So in 313, he had the Edict of Milan, granting freedom to Christians, along with freedom of other religions. That maybe is the only precedence. That is what the point is, that the authorities want to control Christian churches. It's already beyond their control. Right now, yeah, it's kind of quiet, certainly, but they could not stop the growth. They try very much, but their resources, you have to realize resources are limited. If you put the resources here, then you would not be able to do other things. There are other priorities, like taking over Taiwan. That must be a high priority for Xi Jinping. That's his lifetime achievement. If you think about that, that's his legacy that he can have. So when he has other priorities, they have to allow Christian churches to operate in certain spaces. Then, again, it's beyond control.
Good. With that, Yang Fenggang, we've reached that magic time when this is,
On the chat.
well, anyway, I think we just cut it off at this point and we'll go on. But thank you so much, Fenggang. Just one last comment. One of the things that we found in China, even before Tiananmen, but then afterwards, well, when the Chinese would describe themselves, even if they were Christian or not Christian, would just talk about a hollow place in their heart where Mao had been and was now empty. And that was a common phrase you would hear, both, we heard it in Guangzhou, we heard it in Liaoning and elsewhere. And what your comment about the sacrilege of throwing the paint on Mao of those, that kind of reinforced something that really was sort of true, that he was no longer God. And that is, a lot of people are filling that with Christ. But as Ian Johnson has shown with the Souls of China, a lot of religious faith is entering into that chasm, so. But anyway, thank you so much. Let's put our hands together and
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
next week we've got Hannah Nation on Wang Yi. So that will be a significant lecture as well. So look forward to seeing you all next week, and thanks again, Fenggang. Excellent, excellent lecture. All right, so
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's